Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. A lot of big things happening here and around the world, so we'll update you on those protests. Pete Hegseth had some significant testimony in front of Congress yesterday. Moments did not go so well, so break all of that down for you. Also, Gavin Newsom obviously seizing the moment to potentially further his presidential ambitions, so we'll break down the political aspect of that as well. All eyes on Israel and Iran. Some very ominous signs that Israel may be preparing to strike Iran. Murtaza Hussein is going to join us to break down those indications and what we can say about that and where those nuclear talks between Trump and the Iranians are as of today. So break all of that down for obviously extraordinarily consequential news there. Yesterday, we received word from the Trump administration that they have a China deal, we'll call it. It seems like it's a framework at this point. We've got some of the loose details, Scott Bessent and others answering questions. So we'll tell you what we know about that. We also have some sort of rapprochement with Elon and Trump, him posting yesterday at 3:04 a.m., which Emily and I mentioned in the show. We didn't have a chance to fully break it down. He regrets.
Yeah, he regrets
some of the things that he said went too far, Saagar.
Yes, that's right. It appears to have been at high-level brokered talks between the White House and between Elon. So perhaps this is the the beginning of the bromance again. We'll see.
You never know. Twists and turns.
We can only hope no, but you never know.
We have some big news in the New York City mayoral race. First poll ever to come out that shows Zohran Mamdani leading that race, beating Andrew Cuomo, former governor. We also have some clips from his appearance on The Breakfast Club, which were pretty interesting as well. So we'll take a look at that and what that means more broadly for the Democratic Party, the country, all that good stuff. Before we get to any of that, Saagar, today is the last day of the free month trial.
That's right. Unfortunately, it is the very, very last day. Or perhaps fortunately, for those of you who have been waiting and you've just been hovering there with your mouse, you can go ahead and sign up at breakingpoints.com, BP free. See what we're all about. You can check out the trial for yourself. You'll get the full show, of course, the AMA access, some of the Friday show, exclusive content, and so much more. So go ahead and sign up at breakingpoints.com. The promo code is BP free. We deeply appreciate so many of the people who have signed up here. You're preventing Ryan from having to do, Hims ads
is the one
or the Saagar and Jetty parlay, the exclusive Saagar DraftKings parlay, or FanDuel. Can you imagine that? The Prize Picks or any of these other joke sports books that are out there. So AG1 and all of this. So if you don't want to hear that, you can go ahead and sign up at breakingpoints.com. BP free, use that promo code. All right, let's get to the protest.
All right, let's go ahead and get to the protests. Best as I can tell, protests around the country and including LA are pretty quiet last night. The mayor of LA has instituted a curfew, and that seems to have calmed things down significantly. So let me show you a couple of clips here from Pete Hegseth's testimony before Congress yesterday. So he got asked whether the Guard could be deployed in other cities. He also got asked about the usage of the National Guard on January 6th versus with regards to what is going down in LA. Let's go ahead and take a listen to what he had to say.
Or which Guard? And I'm trying to figure out if you decided to do this collectively in Kansas or any other place, would you need to specify a new sort of fact pattern? Or do you think this order applies to any Guard, anywhere, any service branch, anywhere? It's just I get your justification. We disagree about the circumstances. I'm just trying to figure out, did you just potentially mobilize every Guard everywhere and every service member everywhere? I mean, create the framework for that. I understand you didn't. I'm saying, what does the document do in your opinion?
Senator, if you notice, the initial order of 2,000 in California was followed by a follow-on order for the additional 2,000, with a recognition that the situation there required more resources in order to support law enforcement. So part of it is getting ahead of a problem so that if in other places, if there are other riots in places where law enforcement officers are threatened, we would have the capability to surge National Guard there if necessary.
The National Guard was deployed here on January 6th, and that was a decision made by the Department of Defense. Do you support that decision? Do you believe that that was the right decision to deploy the National Guard to defend the Capitol on January 6th?
All I know is it's the right decision to be deploying the National Guard in Los Angeles to defend ICE agents who deserve to be defended in the execution of their jobs.
But I think it's important to know whether you think it was also important to have the National Guard defending the United States Capitol when there were violent protesters here on the president's behalf, to make sure that folks know that you care about protest, whether it's against the president or on behalf of the president?
Senator, I was in the Washington, D.C. National Guard when that happened and was initially ordered to go guard the inauguration of Joe Biden. But because of the politicization of the Biden administration, my orders were revoked. And ultimately, because of the politics that were being played inside the Defense Department by the previous administration.
But do you support the decision made on January 6th to send the National Guard here to defend
I
the
support
Capitol?
the decision that President Trump made and requesting the National Guard that was denied.
So you do not.
President Trump
you do not support the decision.
Support
you do not
for the National
support the
Guard
decision
in
to send the
advance
National
and was
Guard here
denied.
to defend the Capitol. I think that speaks to the worry that many Americans have that there is a double standard.
So obviously, two significant things there. First of all, no limiting principle on the order that Trump signed. Hegseth acknowledges effectively that, yeah, we could deploy troops, we could federalize National Guard anywhere. And, really important in the context of there are planned protests this weekend on the day of Trump's big military/birthday parade. Trump himself said that protesters, not violent protesters, just protesters in general, would be met with force. So Pete Hegseth indicating, yeah, this isn't just about LA. We have the option available, and I don't think anyone would, be surprised if they federalize the National Guard in other places, blue states and cities in particular. The other piece here, actually good question from Senator Chris Murphy, because, the January 6th riots were, significantly more consequential and violent than what was going down in LA. And Pete Hegseth can't bring himself to say that it was the right decision in that instance to bring in the National Guard, but he is fully behind bringing it in LA. So before I play the next one, what did you make of that, Saagar?
Yeah, I mean, the Jan 6 element is one which always really comes back to bite them, because you see a lot of the insurrectionist stuff that is being used right now. Here's the thing. We were critical of that National Guard deployment at the time, if you recall. I was talking about it with Ryan. I mean, all of those images of people sleeping on the floor in parking garages and stuff, that actually happened here. We were effectively occupied in Washington for 3 months, and it cost, I don't even remember how many billions and billions of dollars. It was useless. It was a completely unnecessary thing. We have some 5,000 U.S. troops of some kind, either National Guardsmen and or United States Marines, that are being deployed in defense of this. The crazy thing about the Marines is that we were told that they were actually ready and had been trained in riot control and all this other stuff, but they're actually not the case. They're not even in Los Angeles right now at the moment. So this is a colossal, expenditure for what purpose exactly? I mean, the current estimate is some $131 million for a single, it's not even been a full week of this. So extrapolate that out more. Also, anybody who remembers covering the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the number of support personnel that you need to support anything like this is astounding. And so I think that the more that this, continues, and especially if it goes national, it's really going to be, a very easy talking point, I think, for Democrats, not only to talk about January 6th, but also just the cost. The cost does matter here, where it's like you guys are literally rolling around celebrating a $5 million cut to Zimbabwe. It's like you just blew 100 times that over a weekend deployment to Los Angeles. So, yeah, I think that I think we are trending, if we talked about the politics and stuff like that here, and especially as violence hasn't happened yesterday. We'll see over the weekend whenever Buddy's not at work or whatever, but especially if things begin to go down and you just see more militarized images that come out of LA, I do think things could turn against them.
Let's go ahead and take a listen to this next part, because he gets asked in addition, okay, so under what authority are the deployment of the Marines in particular, what constitutional authority is justifying this extraordinary action with regard to federalizing the National Guard and bringing in the Marines? Let's go ahead and take a listen to how he responds to that.
Just specifically, Mr. Secretary, what is the authority that the administration is using to deploy active duty Marines to California neighborhoods? What authority?
Senator, the president has constitutional authority in order to support.
Cite the provision of the Constitution.
I'd have to pull up the specific provision, but our Office of General Counsel, alongside our leadership, has reviewed and ensured in the order that we set out that it's completely constitutional for the president to use federal troops to defend federal law enforcement administration. Are
you prepared to authorize DHS to use drones and also to authorize military forces to detain or arrest American citizens?
Senator, every authorization we've provided the National Guard and the Marines in Los Angeles is under the authority of the President of the United States, is lawful and constitutional. They are assisting in defending
So the answer
law
is yes.
enforcement officers
So the
and law
answer is
enforcement
yes.
facilities
So the answer is
in the
yes.
execution of their job
The answer is yes.
in the city of Los Angeles.
So won't rule out their use of drones and military forces. Obviously, the first clip where he's like, I don't really know what authority. I'm sure it's constitutional, but I can't really tell you how. Not a great look there at a time when, you know, the authorization of this is legally contested. Gavin Newsom has already sued. There's actually supposed to be hearings today about whether or not this was a lawful deployment of both the Marines and the decision to federalize the National Guard over the objections of the governor of California. And Saagar, I was reading yesterday, I actually didn't realize this. Marines were used in 1992 in the context of suppressing the LA riots. Yeah. And some of the local cops were like, this was really not great because they're not trained for domestic law enforcement situations. And one of the anecdotes that you know, became sort of notorious coming out of that is the LAPD were like, all right, cover us, to the Marines, cover us as we go into this house, as we approach this house. Well, for law enforcement, that means, okay, watch, make sure no one's coming out. For the Marines, it meant light up the whole house. And the LAPD was like, what the hell are you doing? They're like, you told us to cover you. To us, that's what that means. So just to give one example of how that's why you don't deploy active duty soldiers on American streets outside of truly extraordinary circumstances. Now, the LA riots in 1992, I mean, it is hard to, if you haven't watched anything or read the news about what went down there, I mean, it was insane. Over 60 people killed, $1 billion in damage, businesses looted. I mean, this was just going on and on. It was a massive, uncontrolled conflagration. And you had the governor of California who said, yes, we need the help. Yes, let's federalize the National Guard. Yes, federal government, please come in and assist us. Totally different situation here. And I think, Saagar, that is what, you know, is so disturbing to me, is the attempt to normalize the use of military forces in a domestic law enforcement context and to make it seem normal to have our streets completely militarized in this way. You know, I think you and Ryan made a great point that part of what has conditioned us for this moment also is how all of the local law enforcement in every major city, you can't even tell them apart from National Guard.
It's funny. I see these clips go viral all the time. They're like, look, National Guardsmen. I'm like, no, that's LAPD. We're dressed in camo. For what purpose? I wrote a piece years ago about Ferguson and about how that actually set the tone for a lot of what we saw. I mean, look, we could debate Ferguson and all that, but I don't think anybody's going to be sitting around defending Ferguson PD, even at a right or a left-wing level. And that's specifically because of this. That's what a lot of the conversation, unfortunately, has actually gotten worse. And that is really, I mean, look, I think it's dangerous in this regard. And again, you know, for the White House, they really do seem to believe that they're on their strongest footing in taking it on. And look, I mean, we did not deny here that the Mexican flag stuff, all of that is not good. I mean, look, there has been some property damage, but, you know, I think contextualizing the scale of this is actually genuinely important, specifically because of the reaction that they're coming here. But look, we can't deny it. This is something that the White House wants to pick this fight. And in some respects, I'm still a bit torn. I don't know yet how the country is going to react because, you know, I did underestimate how much of this like left-wing cities out of control stuff has become not only a meme, but like a shibboleth literally across the entire country. Like if you don't live in a city, you live in the upper Midwest and stuff, these images are everywhere. It's literally like, you know, calling people in San Francisco and be like, are you safe? You know, they really have no familiarity at all with that. And you can't blame them, probably vice versa as well. I'm still kind of trying to tease out and see like how this goes. They clearly believe that things are going to be, you know, for them, but also it's probably about tone setting as well, you know, especially ahead of this military parade here in Washington and New York City, Chicago, Dallas. There's been some other protests, but nothing has really risen to the level of LA. And so perhaps that's part of it as well.
Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and get to this next piece where, you know, the Trump administration has been threatening to arrest Gavin Newsom. Tom Homan first, you know, said this, and then Trump said, yeah, I think he should. And Trump got another question about this yesterday whether or not he thinks that Gavin Newsom could be charged and arrested. By the way, the last time he got asked this of like, well, exactly what would be the pretext for arresting him, and he said for running for governor. That was the reason. That was the reason he should be charged and arrested. So in any case, he gets asked about this again. Let's take a listen.
Are you going to arrest Gavin Newsom?
Well, he's not doing a good job. You know, arrest, what does that mean? He's not doing a good job.
Charge him?
Well, in theory, you could, I guess. You know, it's almost like a dissipation of duty. Nobody's ever seen anything like that.
In theory, I could. So that is where that stands. Also, Saagar, this week they charged this Congresswoman McIver with, crimes that could lead to 17 years in prison in the context of that, situation that unfolded outside of a federal detention facility that ICE was using in Newark, New Jersey. So, you've got a lot of authoritarian pieces coming together here. You have the charging this Congresswoman, you have the threats of arrest of Gavin Newsom for existing and doing things that Trump didn't like. You have the federalizing of the National Guard over the objections of the elected governor of California. You have the deployment of Marines. You had that wild partisan speech to troops at Fort Bragg. By the way, we learned more about that. First of all, they were hand-selected to make sure they had the right politics, the ones that were behind Trump. And they sold them MAGA merchandise, which is like, again, I know no one cares about the before times and what things used to be like, but these are things that would just be completely out of bounds. And then you have tanks being rolled into D.C. for his big birthday parade, show of force and strength, et cetera. So a lot of authoritarian elements just in your face, flood the zone with them this week as we head into the weekend where there are planned significant protests. They're called No Kings protests that were planned across the country.
And especially here in Washington. Yeah, I'm actually curious to see. We're going to get to that in a little bit as to how the protests and the parade itself might be disrupted because of weather. But
who is going to this parade? They asked a bunch of Republicans and none of them were.
I think it's the military. I think what they're going to do is because, remember, the ostensible purpose of the parade is the United States Army's 250th birthday. And so,
just
look,
happens to coincide.
Yeah, it happens
Trump's birthday.
Whatever. I will not be attending, mostly because of traffic reasons. It's impossible to get into the city. But what you have here in the Northern Virginia area, as you know, is like there's what half the United States military lives around the Pentagon. They're either going to get orders or they're going to go. And so with a lot of their families. And so that's why I think the vast majority of the people who will be there in attendance of the Grand Parade. Shall we remember what the inspiration for this was? Is that all because 5 or 6 years ago, Trump went to the Bastille Day parades in France. And he was like, hey, this is pretty cool, watching tanks and all that roll down the Champs-Élysées. And that's why he was like, okay, we need to bring this to Washington. I'm actually surprised because it was supposed to be for America's 250th birthday, which I believe isn't that next year in 2026? Yeah, so 1776, so it would have been next year, so July 4th, 2026. But I guess he just had to have one for the 250th birthday of the U.S. Army. It's something that definitely the U.S. population knows quite a bit about. I'm telling you, I didn't even know when the 250th birthday.
Well, America's birthday doesn't fall on Trump's birthday, so that wasn't going to work out, Saagar.
That's it.
Silly you.
Yeah.
One more piece here. We can go ahead and is this a VO or a SOG, guys? You can let me know. A pretty troubling, in my opinion, given the context, Truth Social post from Trump. Let's go ahead and put this up on the. Oh, it's Assad. So let's go ahead and play this and you can take a look at the text on the screen. Let me go ahead and read this a little bit to you before we play it because for those of you who are listening by podcast, he says, I am more confident than ever that in the days ahead and every generation to come, the U.S. Army will heap glory upon glory. You will summon inexhaustible courage. You'll protect every inch of U.S. soil. You will defend America to the ends of the earth in the days ahead. Okay, let's take a listen.
Just a job, it's a calling and a sacred tradition passed down from father to son, brother to sister, and one generation to the next. At every hour of danger, our noblest citizens have answered that call. Time and again, our enemies have learned that if you dare to threaten the American people, American soldier will chase you down, crush you, and cast you into oblivion.
All right, so that was that. In addition, Saagar, you pulled this. It literally may rain on his parade
Yes,
this weekend.
actually, literal rain on the parade. I'm an avid DC weather watcher. Here we have storms.
Shout out to the Capitol Weather Gang.
Threaten you. Yeah, shout out to the Capitol Weather Gang. If you do live in the DMV area, they are absolutely the best. Threaten the U.S. Army's 250th celebration in DC on Saturday. A slow-moving front may trigger late-day showers and storms as the parade concert and fireworks crowds are gathering. Morning looks mostly dry, but heat and humidity are building. I'm going to say this. I get how in the vacuum that Truth Social post and all that looks troubling, but having covered the Pentagon, the absolute vast majority of like Pentagon agitprop and stuff that they put out is like this.
Yeah.
I get where you're coming from.
Well,
I
yeah.
do. People should just know like this type of this is standard fare for like Obama, for the first Trump administration. Basically, anytime they're like, oh, the war fighters, the killers, the U.S. Army. So just so people know, that is what a very average U.S. Army propaganda video
that's the
looks
case.
like.
And you know what? Any of these things, well, not any of them, but some of these things individually, like the military parade.
Yeah.
If this is a normal administration and they're doing this weird ass, all right.
Whatever.
I mean, it's a waste of money. Like, what are we doing? We're destroying the streets in DC. They really don't need that.
Well,
like,
it's shitty streets anyway, so maybe we can rebuild them properly.
it's not great, but is it the end of the world? No. Coming in the context of everything else, that's where it becomes, when you see the tanks being rolled into DC, at the time when they're threatening the use of the National Guard, federalizing the National Guard in cities across the country, and they're deploying active duty Marines against US citizens for like incredibly pretextual reasons over the objections of the elected governor of that state. And oh, by the way, they're threatening to arrest the elected governor of that state because he got elected. That's when I see things like that and, they add to a picture that is, to me, deeply troubling. And last thing I'll say, and then we can move on to Gavin Newsom and how he is certainly enjoying his moment in the sun with all of this. There has been a pattern in this administration where it's not just this moment, it's the attacks on the universities, it's the, trying to bring the media to heel, it's even the use of national emergency to justify this wild tariff regime. Like, the consistent pattern in this administration has been consolidation of power. And it feels very much like we're coming to a crescendo with that. And also, Saagar, one other, note of some of the context which you've gestured at before is the quote-unquote big, beautiful bill is wildly unpopular. People see it as a giant giveaway to the rich because that's what it is. And so they're also trying to use this moment of large-scale anti-ICE protests to refashion and rebrand the big, beautiful bill as being about immigration. And you see Stephen Miller doing this, aggressively going after Rand Paul and the libertarians who are opposed to it and saying, basically, if you oppose this and you oppose border security, you oppose the president's agenda on immigration. So I think that is another one of the political goals that they are trying to effectuate.
There's no question. I genuinely, again, I don't know. I mean, we have polls yesterday we covered immigration. Trump is the strongest issue. I saw a Quinnipiac poll more recently, showed him underwater. It's a little bit hard to believe. The numbers are a little bit too fantastical, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's moving towards more 50-50. But there's no question on the bill. I mean, I flagged it from day one. I'm like, look, they're going to do it, and it's going to be massively unpopular.
Yeah.
There's just, I mean, that's what the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act story.
True.
Part of it was in the first term, we're basically lining up almost the exact same timeline with the passage of the so-called big, beautiful bill, and tying these two things together does give them a lot of cover for eventually going home and telling people what it's all about. But of course, Americans are smart, at least in this regard. Anytime a piece of tax legislation passes, they're like, hey, so what's in this exactly? They're like, oh, okay, got it. Not a whole lot for me.
What a surprise.
And actually, even right now, there's all these stupid fights right now, even in the Senate, to make sure that they at least strip like some of the decent parts out of the bill. So honestly, it can be a lot worse.
They want to take out with like tax on tips and stuff.
They want to take out tax on tips, or at least restrict it, and then even the SALT cap. They want to make it to lower it even more to anger some of the blue states. It's just stuff like that where it's just preposterous. But can I say this? I actually was reading about the new SALT thing. It's not a terrible thing. Basically, they income raise it so that people who are like upper middle class earners in California and in New York are at least like grandfathered into a more modest thing. So it applies to the millionaires, but not to upper middle class people. I'm like, okay, I think that's, relatively fine.
Yeah, that's not bad.
So I just say that. I just want people to know, like, the current way that this all thing is structured, I actually think is quite fair. They income cap it at like 400,000 or something, basically making sure that high property tax people in New York and California don't get double screwed. I think it's fine. At the same time, we're not all shedding tears for people making 300,000 or 400,000 a year.
All right.
My point just being that the bill itself is deeply unpopular. A lot of what is all happening with this is effectively like a gambit to distract. But what we will soon talk about looms over all of this is Iran. And actually, that is where I would be the most worried. And this is my great hope, and I'll say it again, but if there is some sort of outbreak of conflict, then I would hope that people really do take to the streets the way that they did with the war in Iraq. Don't forget, millions of people took to the streets across the world to protest that war. And that is also where we could see significant, and the weaponization of this great so-called anti-Semitism machine, against people. And if those two things are conflated, saying that war with Iran is bad because it is anti-Semitic, that's probably where I worry the most, especially with conflict on the horizon right now.
Well, I do have some good news for you, which is that Mr. Salt himself, Josh Gottheimer, got his
He lost his
handed to him in the Democratic primary, came in 4th place with 11% of the vote.
Yeah.
So, he thought he was really killing it.
Well, those
Didn't work out
11%,
so well.
those are the richest people in New Jersey.
I guess, his
love
constituents showed up and
They
voted
love
for
him.
And
They
I'm
really
sure
do.
they'll give him more campaign funds in the future. Anyway, okay, let's go ahead and move on to Gavin Newsom. One of the interesting things here is Newsom really coming into the Trump administration kind of misread the moment with regard to the Democratic base. We talked about this before. He launched his podcast, seeing, okay, it's the podcast moment. I'm going to launch my podcast. And then he had on people from the right, like Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon. And Gavin Newsom is actually a very good debater. Like, I'm not a big fan of Gavin Newsom, but you have to, acknowledge political talent where it exists. He did a great job in that debate versus Ron DeSantis. That was, very well received among the Democratic base, got a lot of attention, et cetera. So he has the chops to do it. And instead, he invites on Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon and basically, lets them berate him. And he just sort of, takes it and is like, oh, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Democratic base at that point, we're looking for people who are willing to fight. So that's how Bernie ends up, wildly popular with the base. AOC ends up wildly popular with the base. Jasmine Crockett has her moment and becomes, this national figure, et cetera. So he wildly misreads the moment. And obviously everyone knows this man has been dreaming of being president for probably his whole life, being the sort of sociopathic individual that he is. So he misreads things at the beginning. Now Trump has handed him this very large opportunity in the national spotlight to stand up to Trump in the way that a Democratic base and a lot of independent voters, I think, want to see. And in a lot of ways, I do think he has met that moment. At the same time, other Democrats are like, the Democratic Party is just so utterly pathetic. I've read this thing, Saagar, about how they're not sure whether they should pick this fight with Trump, and they don't know if this is the place to stand, and it might just be a distraction. It's like, could you just have some principle that you're willing to stand for without taking a fucking focus group poll tested situation before you know what to say? It's so pathetic and disgusting to me. And it serves Gavin Newsom because then he ends up being the only one out there in the spotlight. So all of that being said, Harry Enton and CNN took a look at the Google search traffic and how this is all playing into Newsom's 2028 ambitions. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
Yeah, let's just start off. If Gavin Newsom wanted to take on Donald Trump and loves the attention, he has 100% gotten it. Take a look here. Google searches of Gavin Newsom with Donald Trump. Get this up. 9,700% versus a week ago. More folks are Googling Gavin Newsom's name with Donald Trump than ever before in Google searches dating all the way back since 2004. Donald Trump was able to make a name for himself through The Apprentice, through all of his business ventures. He is now making a name for Gavin Newsom, who seems more than willing to relish in this fight. Should Democrats oppose Donald Trump more? Among Democrats, look at this. 84% of Democrats nationwide say they want Democrats to take on Donald Trump more. This is not 2017 anymore, where the majority of Democrats want to compromise with Donald Trump. No, they want a fighter with Donald Trump. Top chances to be the 2028 nominee. Look, it's a clown car at this particular point. all these candidates squished together. But you'll notice that one name is ahead of the rest, and that's Gavin Newsom at 12%. You see Ocasio-Cortez 10, Buttigieg 10, Shapiro 6%. But Gavin Newsom certainly is up there right now in terms of the candidates who are best in position to get that 2028 nomination.
And this is concerning to me because I'm not a Gavin Newsom fan, in terms of how he's governed in California. Basically, if there's a conflict between core Democratic-based principles, things like supporting labor unions or expanding healthcare and donors, he's going with the donors. So that's kind of the way you should understand his governance. So the fact that I think he is doing himself a lot of favors with the Democratic base, and I have to say, has been much more responsive on social media. He really does sort of understand, the new media ecosystem a lot better than
I was
other
talking
Democrats.
about that with Ryan. I was like, look at this dude. His first interviews, I see Brian Tyler Cohen and Midas
Pod
Touch.
Save.
Smart, right? Pod Save America.
We
Smart.
asked him for an interview, by the way.
Yeah,
they
turned us down. Yeah, that's all right. We tried.
He wanted to stay with the solidly liberal
It's annoying because
corner, but that's what the right does too.
We wouldn't be annoying about it. I'm just, I don't know. Anyway,
We'd ask him some real questions.
Yeah, I would ask him
for
some
sure.
real questions. Whatever, we can table that. Actually, Gavin's staff and I back in the day actually had a decent exchange. So they should know I have been fair to them.
He follows me on Twitter, so I thought maybe there was a
all right,
chance,
well, California is our largest audience. So California, many of you are constituents of Gavin. So tell Gav to listen to the people. I doubt he will. That's not exactly how things work over there. No, I do think he's actually handling himself quite well. I've always been a Newsom admirer for his sheer political talent. I think he is clowned in very unfair ways. I remember I just thought there was no way French Laundry would ever happen. And I was like, there's no way that he gets away with this. But he survived, not only survived the recall election, since then is broadly popular-ish. He understands new media. And I think one of the things I underestimated is, look, California is a machine state. The machine produces a lot of horrible politicians. But in general, we shouldn't underestimate the governor of the most populous state in the entire union. That has been a mistake.
One of the largest economies in the world.
Literally one of the largest economies in the world. I mean, people underestimated Richard Nixon for being from California. People underestimated Ronald Reagan from being from California. California looms large over our politics, always has for a long time. And I think that with Gavin Newsom, that is where his sheer political talent, which was on display with that debate with Ron DeSantis. Again, you can debate did he score a point here or there, on the merits? It's not really about that. It's really about his affectation. And the thing I've always said about Gavin is Gavin loves the game more than anything else in the world. He's got the black hole inside of him. That's what you need. Why else are you going on Sean Hannity's show? That's nuts. Why are you texting Sean Hannity during his live broadcast? Quibbling with some of the things that Sean says, because you have to be obsessed with yourself and you have to need that affirmation more than anything else in the world. And that you can't teach that. You have to just be born with it. And so I really see that inside of him, and especially now, with the way the stars are aligning, Gavin is learning, that Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk stuff that he was doing in the very beginning, that's really not the most politically effective strategy. And he will now really align himself as a major resistance figure.
Now,
and he doesn't have the baggage that Karen Bass has. That's another critical thing. Karen is so horribly, just scarred by those fires that Gavin is the real leader of the liberal resistance right now.
True.
To Donald Trump.
And he just has more whatever than she has too.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing that I'm concerned about. The Democratic base, actually Democratic congressional leaders are underwater with the base. That is very different from Trump 1.0. They have been radicalized in a lot of regards. They are disgusted with the Chuck Schumers and Hakeem Jeffries and the people who capitulated. And Gavin Newsom was very much putting himself in that camp with the way that he approached those interviews with Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon. At first, when I saw his lineup for initial podcast guests, I thought it could really benefit him if he was going to go in and really spar with them. I mean, it doesn't have to be vicious, but if he was going to get into an exchange and have these viral moments, that would have been really smart. What I'm concerned about with the Democratic base is, they want a fighter and someone who's standing up to Trump. There is a kind of ideological neutrality it's not like they specifically want like a particular policy agenda. They just want people who get caught fighting. And that's where if you have someone like a Gavin Newsom or a Pete Buttigieg for that matter, who are good at going into spaces on Fox News and tussling with them and, good at doing like the performance of standing up to Trump. And and again, I hand it to Gavin. I think he's doing a good job in this moment of, standing up for California, standing up for his values, not backing down, all of those sorts of things. I think that, that could be that could be something that a Democratic base would be interested in, even though on the merits in terms of what they offer policy-wise, it's like just more of the same sort of status quo liberal type politician. So in any case, he gave his big sort of primetime address. You can put this up on the screen. The New York Times analyzed this as having a 2028 subtext, which I think you would have to, be pretty silly and naive not to see. They lead this off with when Gavin Newsom stepped in front of a camera Tuesday evening. He was a California governor addressing his constituents. But by the time Mr. Newsom was finished, it was clear the governor was speaking not only to his state, but to his country and his beleaguered party. To Democrats looking for direction and leadership, Mr. Newsom used one of the highest profile moments of his political career to lay out the threat that he argued President Trump posed the nation and how Americans should resist it. And he suggested he was the man to lead that fight. Democracy is under assault right before our eyes, Mr. Newsom said. The moment we have feared has arrived. And as I said before, the fact that other Democrats are not so much stepping up to the plate to defend California in an aggressive way and, are wary of picking this fight with Trump and whatever, it really has allowed him to grab and capitalize on the moment. And then to the point of the way he's using social media in a much more sort of direct way, tussling with Stephen Miller and other various Trump officials, even going back and forth with, sort of like influencer types on the right and asserting, his position and all of these things in real time. He also posted this Star Wars, I guess not meme, but of reading the Emperor reading one of Trump's tweets. Let's go ahead and take a listen to this.
A once great American city, Los Angeles, has been invaded and occupied by illegal aliens and criminals. Now violent insurrectionist mobs are swarming and attacking our federal agents to try and stop our deportation operations.
Saagar thought it was kind of cringe. I don't know. I thought it was kind of good.
Cringe.
I thought
Sorry,
it was clever. I thought it was pretty clever.
Anything political Star Wars is cringe. Listen, I love Star Wars, all right? Like we were talking earlier, Andor is awesome. Tony Gilroy is absolutely GOAT status. But unfortunately, when politicians try to invoke the evil empire or any of that stuff, it absolutely doesn't work for me. I will also acknowledge it's the most basic level of like memification on the internet when talking about big stuff. So I have to only assume it will largely go over well with, a lot of people. You can always assume the worst in terms of its popularity. I think broadly him and Pete Buttigieg are handling himself very well. It kills me to say it. It kills me to say to watch these two people. But I didn't have enough of a chance to talk about Buttigieg on Flagrant. I mean, he did well. It got millions of views. There's a viral video of him where Andrew's like, "So what do you want?" And he's like, "I want you to be able to get up in the morning and be able to go to work." I mean, it was everywhere. And it led to, there's a new New York Times profile about some of the broadcasters or whatever, but it mentions that interview with Andrew Schultz specifically. We had Bernie Sanders that was more recently there as well. These are the people who understand the current media environment, and they know how to play. They're willing to take risks. That's something we talked about yesterday on the Theo Von segment. It's like, just take a risk. Schultz was making hooker jokes at one point. Buttigieg is clearly uncomfortable, but it's like, that's part of it, and a lot of people just don't want to sit there and they don't want to take it. But, with risk comes reward. Trump showed us that's a very effective communication strategy, and it's definitely one that should be cemented now at this time. So, I don't know.
Both of them have that annoying ass Obama cadence, which to me should be disqualifying from the jump, on that alone, let alone their, status quo neoliberal politics. But I will put that in there, especially with Gavin. There is just something about him that reads used car salesman.
Absolutely.
He does read just like typical slimy politician. That's just the vibe you get from him. I've always thought he looks like a vampire from a movie. And so, it's not a lock-in, but he's certainly using this moment to the greatest effect that he possibly can to bolster his chances in 2028.
Absolutely. All right, let's get over to Iran. We're very excited now to be joined by Murtaza Hussain. He is a national security and foreign affairs correspondent for Dropsite News, great friends of the show. It's good to see you, man. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, good to see you guys.
All right, well, you join us at a very, very consequential time, my friend. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. We have major developments across the Middle East. CBS News and multiple other outlets reporting, quote, Israel is poised to launch an operation on Iran. So, Maz, what we know so far from inside the administration is that this is being sold allegedly as Israel is poised to strike Iran without U.S. approval. But it appears, of course, the U.S. at least has some forewarning, its own intelligence, perhaps even at diplomatic channels. Things are all over the place in terms of what's actually happening. There has been widespread now evacuation, or at least voluntarily evacuation, of the departure of dependents in the U.S. military bases across the region. President Donald Trump has reacted very ominously. I'm going to play this, and then we're going to get your reaction. Let's take a listen.
Could you provide an update on Iran? We're hearing reports that U.S. personnel are being moved out of the region within striking distance.
Well, they are being moved out because it could be a dangerous place, and we'll see what happens. But they are we've given notice to move out, and we'll see what happens.
Is there anything that can be done to dial the temperature down in the region?
They can't have a nuclear weapon, very simply. They can't have a nuclear weapon. We're not going to allow that.
Say it. Why are U.S. dependents of military personnel being authorized to leave the Middle East?
We'll have to see. Thank you.
Some ominous stuff there, Maz. He's basically like, yeah, could be a dangerous place. So combined with the Israel reporting, what can you tell us?
Yeah, it's unfortunate because about a month and a half ago, it seemed like the situation was much more optimistic. And I think I would attribute the change to changing statements from Steve Witkoff and people in Congress as well, too. At the start of the process, Witkoff was saying that the U.S. would be okay with the Iranians having low-level nuclear enrichment for civilian purposes, which would then be monitored and so forth by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And the Iranians are okay with that. They don't necessarily want a nuclear bomb per se. They could have pursued one some years ago, but there are great costs associated with having a bomb. It would piss off many of their neighbors separate from the U.S. It would probably start an arms race in the Middle East as well, too. It could trigger a war, at least for a short term, with the U.S. or other parties. So they have said they don't want a bomb, but they don't want to dismantle their entire nuclear energy program, which they spend many, many years building. It's an issue of national pride as well, too. So Witkoff now is taking a very, very, or expressing or conveying a very, very maximalist position, which is kind of like the Libya position.
Yes.
As people remember, Libya agreed to dismantle its entire putative capacity for developing everything, which even could be a WMD. And that didn't end very well for Libya. It wasn't a very advisable path if you look at it from the Libyans' perspective.
That's a really polite way of saying getting sodomized on television, you know? I mean, let's be honest about what happened here. Yeah.
Yeah, the Libyans agreed to dismantle, and then they were attacked, and their leadership was killed and driven to exile and many terrible things. So the Iranians do not want to repeat that. So effectively, we have a situation where the U.S. red line that's currently publicly expressed and the Iranian red line is incommensurate. The U.S. is saying now that they can't have any enrichment at all. The Iranians saying we'll never give up our enrichment. So in this case, it creates a situation where a conflict would become inevitable unless one side were to compromise or back down. And I think what we saw the last couple of days are attempts to maybe do psychological operations, saying that the Israelis are going to attack you if you don't compromise on this subject. But so what we've seen so far, the Iranians do not seem to be backing down per se. Today, they escalated quite a bit, saying that they may withdraw from their nuclear treaties and take other steps in response to that as well, too. So I think, unfortunately, we've had a situation where a deal was very, very attainable. But now, at least the last 48 hours, seemed a lot less so.
And Maz, how do you assess the likelihood that Israel will strike Iran? Obviously, you have the personnel being pulled from the region. That's one indication. You also have various people now going out and saying, oh, they're really close to, achieving a nuclear weapon, which we always hear, before the war drums start beating. So how likely do you think it is that we are on the precipice of some sort of Israeli action, also given the fact that it appears Trump has a couple times during the course of this negotiation sort of pushed them off and said, no, you can't strike Iran at this point?
Yeah, the Israeli modus operandi is usually to strike when people are not expecting it and not to telegraph it's happening beforehand. So what you see in the last couple of days is a tremendous amount of signaling and telegraphing, which makes me think this is more, at least for now, psychological. They're not necessarily preparing for an imminent attack. But, there are talks scheduled for this weekend between the U.S. and Iran in Oman. And based on what happens in those talks, the situation could change. But I think if the Israelis do attack or someone does attack, there won't be this lead up that's very, very public where they're issuing statements publicly and evacuating people in a very, very, notable manner. I think they would try to use the element of surprise as much as possible. But I think the thing is, the Iranians, if they really do believe that the Israelis or even the U.S. is going to attack them, they're going to take preparations beforehand. They're going to try to move as much nuclear material out of the likely to be targeted sites beforehand. They may withdraw from certain treaties or expel inspectors so they can take their nuclear materials completely into private. So actually, even from the perspective, if you want to stop an Iranian nuclear weapon, attacking is kind of a really bad option because the Iranians, it's a huge country, first of all. It's almost 90 million people. It's a very, very big landmass. It's not like Iraq. It's much more challenging than Iraq to attack for a foreign country. And if they withdraw from these treaties, there's not really much you can do. You can maybe attack them once, but then you're going to have to keep attacking them forever, really, to figure out where the nuclear materials are. The knowledge won't be taken out of the country. It'll still be there. You may have to invade the country even to stop or to root out the new suspected nuclear sites. Attacking Iran would not be a one-off affair. It wouldn't be a week long or a couple of days or even a month. It would probably take the entire Trump term or even longer beyond that, being involved militarily in the country if you really want to stop the nuclear program, if they withdraw from the treaties. So I think that a deal really does satisfy everyone's needs. It satisfies their own need to maintain some civilian program. The Trump administration wants to pivot to China, doesn't want to have more wars in the Middle East. I think the American public is very, very exhausted and disenchanted with this. So a deal really is the path of least resistance. But because I think that maybe a poison pill has been imposed in this deal based on what we've seen with Witkoff's evolution of statements, it's moved from, agreeing to civilian enrichment and nothing. I think the people in the U.S. who do want a war and they successfully put that change in position in, but it's not really a good solution for anybody. It's bad for Iranians, bad for Americans, bad for Israelis even, to have the major war with Iran for many, many years. But that's the path we're on right now, barring some heroic diplomacy on Sunday.
Well, we can talk about that. So at the very least, there were initial comments that were made that there would be no more or not a sixth round of talks. Now, fortunately for us, we can put this up on the screen. The Omani foreign minister confirmed that talks will happen between Steve Witkoff and between Iran's foreign minister. However, Maz, at the same time, we do know that Israel's head of Mossad and their minister, Ron Dermer, will be meeting with Steve Witkoff apparently ahead of said meeting. Again, potentially for some coordination of what exactly we don't know. But this last round of talks seems very critical because of the position where U.S. intelligence now saying that Israel is basically poised to strike Iran. There's a lot of pressure on the Iranians and the U.S. there. What is your assessment? If this does not come to some decent conclusion in this round, is it even possible for us to have another round, or are we going to see the prelude to, like you said, withdrawing from agreements? I believe Iran just got rebuked this morning by the IAEA over nuclear materials. So things do seem to be trending, in a very bad direction unless things go well during these talks.
Yeah, this is a problem too that Mossad officials and Ron Dermer have been hovering around the talks from the beginning. They've been in Rome, they've been wherever the talks are happening. They're either briefing Witkoff beforehand or just being in the area to let them know that their position is very, very important in these talks. So, to be honest, I'm not particularly optimistic, unfortunately, about the Sunday talks or the talks this weekend. It seems like a last-ditch effort. And, there are strong motivations for both sides to come to some detente. War is not good for the Iranians. War is not good for the U.S. either. I don't think the Trump administration or space wants to see another war like this. But they kind of box themselves in a situation where it's almost, I wouldn't say inevitable, but it's become much more likely than it needs to be. I think that these talks, they're maybe the last efforts to see if any sort of compromise agreement can be found. And if not, you could see Israeli strikes in Iran. But the issue is, if Israel does it alone, quote unquote, it would still have tremendous U.S. intelligence, logistic, and other support. But also, it's very, very likely that the fortified nuclear positions that Iran has cannot be destroyed by Israeli aircraft or munitions. They need American B-2s and 30,000-pound bombs to actually destroy these. So almost inevitably, the Israeli attacks most likely will do an insufficient damage to the Iranian sites, and the U.S. would feel compelled to become involved. And if the Iranians retaliate, which they said they will, that would also create great pressure for the U.S. to get involved to defend Israel as well, too, from those attacks. So I think, unfortunately, even though nobody wants it, everyone's so fed up with wars in the Middle East, we're really headed towards a situation where not just a war in the Middle East, but the biggest war we've ever had in the Middle East could be right on our doorstep just, in a few weeks. So I think that people in the administration or, support of have communication with the administration should sort of impress as much as they can that how close we are, how unnecessary it all is, and how important this diplomacy this weekend and potentially beyond is to avoid what could be a very, very disastrous situation.
Last question that I have for you, Maz. The Trump administration's trying to posture like, oh, Israel might strike Iran. We have nothing to do with it. Let's say they maintain that posture and Israel does strike Iran. Is anyone going to believe that we had nothing to do with it, that this was just Israel acting of their own accord?
I don't think so. There's very, very obvious close coordination with the U.S. and Israel. Also, the U.S. arms Israel. All the arms come from the U.S. And if Israel were to have purchased those arms, it would be prohibitively expensive, actually, for them to carry out the operations they are right now. So there is not really the great acceptance of that. But that said, of course, Iran would like to avoid a direct confrontation with the U.S. itself. It said it would target American bases if the U.S. attacked it. But if there's some plausible deniability, it's kind of useful for both sides to say, well, it was between us and the Israelis, technically. But that said, I do think for the technical reasons I laid out, there's a very strong involvement, even if initially it's only the Israelis directly carrying out the strikes, that the Americans could become, the U.S. military could become involved in the conflict directly, simply only the U.S. military can really destroy these sites,
yes.
Or more has a greater chance of doing so. And if and when the Iranians retaliate, the political pressure in the U.S. to step in to defend Israel, to attack more sites inside Iran with American military weaponry, it will be great. And, the Israelis, they do punch above their weight for their size, but Iran's a much bigger country than Israel. And really, to balance the scales, the Israelis need America to be involved in the war. And I think the entire strategy of Netanyahu and Dermer and so forth is to force America into a conflict because they feel they can't do it alone. They can't achieve what they want to alone. And they really need America to be involved in wars in the Middle East for at least another generation, I'd say.
We already have the playbook, right? They blew up an embassy, and then the Iranians struck back. And guess who shot down 99% of the incoming projectiles? Not them,
exactly.
Right? Yeah, it's like this is already happened. In fact, that was the groundwork for this right now. And by the way, if it costs $1 billion just to shoot down some silly drones and a couple of missiles, what do you think is going to happen if they actually hit nuclear centrifuges and we see real stuff start flying through the air? This is not a joke, as you said, and it's part of the reason why we see this widespread now evacuation of dependent military forces. I mean, the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem is telling people, don't leave the country now for some time. They are taking this very, very seriously, and they don't just do this for no reason. Anyway, we really appreciate your analysis. I hope you're not right. I think you are. I think these weekend's talks are genuine make or break. And I guess we should all just start talking about how Trump is the greatest diplomatic figure, and we should give him the Nobel Prize.
Give him the Nobel Peace Prize.
I will personally fly to Stockholm.
Of getting us back in the deal that he got us out of.
God, please, just get us a deal. Do something, because otherwise, we're headed for bad waters. Thank you so much for joining us, my friend.
Thanks,
we appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
At the same time, we have some updates on the U.S. and China. So Trump says a deal is done. The details are a little bit different. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. Trump said that the deal restoring a China trade truce is done. So let's make this very clear. This is about a deal over the truce, not necessarily a deal between the two countries, although that's originally kind of the way that it was sold. So This was after the update that we gave everybody on Tuesday. The U.S. and China met for the very second time on their trade talks after there was some indication that things might fall apart. The impetus for those talks was China's holdup of rare earth minerals, and that really is the keystone of this entire deal. So what we see right now is that the tariffs are alleged, they're going to stay at the current levels that were signed at a deal in Switzerland about a month or so ago. Trump said in his post that the U.S. would set a total of 55% tariffs, which, by the way, is still, pretty high, as opposed to the 30% previously, and then China would keep its current reciprocal where things are right now. However, what we see right now is that the framework would, quote, restore the pact they agreed to in Switzerland, but increase and freeze for 6 months the speed up of these rare earth minerals coming to the United States. One of the reasons why the administration was so desperate to get that rare earth mineral pipeline back to U.S. production is that we're so wholly reliant on it. We did a thing yesterday about this mineral samarium, which the U.S. military needs for fighter jets and was cut off overnight on China. There were several others we covered here. They have a 100% capacity. I mean, what's annoying about the term rare earth is it's not rare. It's about refining capacity. That's really what it's all about. It's not even necessarily where they're from. It's about the ability to refine it and to make it, usable in production. So can we put the next please part on the screen? This is the most important part, and we flagged at the time. The tariffs itself, of course, mattered, but the cutoff of the minerals and the export licenses by China, which was immediately put into place after the trade war was announced, is the absolute, most impactful thing that they did. And it's not a surprise as to why Trump eventually folded on those China tariffs and why now he has been granted this, quote, 6-month limit on the ease of rare earth export licenses. But I mean, it doesn't take a genius to see 6 months is not a long time, okay? 6 months is basically like a hovering guillotine over the U.S. economy, the U.S. production for so many different critical things that basically makes it so that they have an incredible amount of leverage at this time. And this is part of the problem over the lack of planning. And I would fold in the Build Back Better, or sorry, not Build Back, the big, beautiful bill into this, is there is not really 1 ounce of serious investment to make sure that we're refining, these minerals here or to pump billions into production. I mean, if anything, the criticism of the IRA that it was all green energy, and I'm like, look, fine, then pump it into whatever, for industrialization and all these other plants and things that we want to be able to compete or at least have autonomy from the Chinese here. But instead, it's really the opposite. I mean, effectively, what they're saying here within these bills is they're not only not investing, but the tariff negotiations are actually ones where it seems to actually just extend like a lot of the previous relationship. It's really not, trying to solve a lot of the autonomy problems that we had previously. Like right now, he's like, okay, we'll continue, this thing for 6 months. There's not even really a plan to try and bring TSMC here or anything like that. So it is, I think there's still big, big problems going forward. And if anything, this could actually offset any serious investment that was being made here in the U.S.
Yeah, I don't know if you said, we covered this when you were out, but some U.S. automakers were looking at manufacturing some auto parts in China, so that they could have access
the tariffs as well, and also
to these,
to
what the materials that they need in the context of this, the export controls. That again, this was so thoroughly predictable, which again shows you how haphazard and poorly thought out this entire quote unquote strategy, I don't know if you can even call it there, that is too favorable, has been, where, there's no, okay, these are the industries we need to reshore, and here's the industrial policy that goes with it, and here's how we're building a coalition to make sure that we can do this and stand up to China in this way or that. No, none of that. All of it's by the seat of the pants. And we have another indication of that. So there are sort of conflicting statements coming out of the Trump administration about this upcoming July deadline, in which previously they've said, okay, we're putting in place this 90-day deadline. We're going to have 90 deals in 90 days. How is that going? And that 90-day deadline is fast approaching. The new line out of the administration was, okay, well, if we don't come to deals, we're just going to unilaterally put in place tariffs. I don't know, we'll have a new Liberation Day chart or something like that. Bessent was asked yesterday, and he said that Trump is likely to extend the pause on the tariffs past that. However, Trump yesterday said that he may actually move up the timeline and just start sending out unilateral letters saying, like, this is your new tariff. In any case, let's go ahead and take a listen to what Scott Bessent had to say yesterday.
Very few of the trade deals have been announced yet. I think most people in Congress and around the world would like to know what's going on. Should America be preparing for Liberation Day 2.0? Should we plan, what do we plan for July 9th and July 2nd?
I would say, as I have repeatedly said, that there are 18 important trading partners. We are working toward deals on those, and it is highly likely that those countries that are trading blocs, as in the case of the EU, who are negotiating in good faith, we will roll the date forward to continue good faith negotiations. If someone is not negotiating, then we will not.
So in contrast to that, Trump said that he would set unilateral tariffs in 2 weeks, so who the hell knows. In addition, Scott Bessent also revealed that there is a new TDS. It's not Trump derangement syndrome now, it's also tariff derangement syndrome. Let's take a listen to that.
I will say that I believe that the economic impetus, the certainty, because there is a duality between the critics of this administration. All I hear is tariffs. It's like TDS has become tariff derangement syndrome. And that all I hear about is uncertainty from tariffs. But then the same side wants to give us uncertainty on taxes. So let's get this bill done and get the certainty on taxes. We will have certainty on tariffs within some window over the coming quarters.
Amen,
And then the U.S. economy can realize its full potential.
So tariff derangement syndrome. Maybe people are bringing that up to you a lot because, number one, you are the Treasury Secretary. And number two, because it's actually a real and major issue for the economy, and specifically for businesses trying to figure out what the hell they're going to do and how to plan and how to adjust.
Look, everything right now for the administration is they both want to wave a victory flag because, for example, let's put this next one please up on the screen. U.S. inflation rose only about 0.1% in May from the prior month, which was less than expected. But part of the reason for that was a folding of unilateralism on the tariffs. So they both want to say that people are deranged about the tariffs. Part of the reason why some of the economic data that's been coming in so far is not, catastrophic, is specifically because they retreated from their own policy. Same with the S&P 500, with inflation, with shortages. But I will say, look, I really don't think people have grappled at the political level of what those tariffs really meant for a lot of people. I mean, no matter what, especially if you're in white collar and you work in any sort of business planning, accounting, finance. I mean, this was the story. It's very rare in this country to have the government do something and it directly impacts your business or it directly impacts your thinking. Most people are like, yeah, whatever. I live in Charlotte, okay? Why do I care about what's going on in Los Angeles? Maybe at a conceptual level, but not like this is gonna affect my business, right? And I think that the tariffs in particular at a consumer finance level, and broadly just like people worrying about things being able to buy, that's something that really tapped into people. And we see it also with kind of the absurdity around a lot of this planning. We're not going to be reliant on China anymore. It's like, okay, well, we have the biggest tax bill every 5 years. Where's the dollars to make sure that that's not going to happen? I don't see a single one, right now. Same with these rare earth minerals. People do actually, I think, would support billions of dollars to be pumped into making sure that these types of reliance on China would not be there. But that's not broadly, where things are. And that's actually a biggest failure I see with this whole strategy. What is this about, right? It's because at the very beginning, if we just came off of this, to me, it's about autonomy. It's about being a real country is one that's able to produce its own weapons, produce its own food, produce its own energy, and produce the things that it needs to function. Yes, we can have trade, but in a time of war, in a time of crisis, we need to make sure this hedge fund stuff that pumps our economy right now, it's all bullshit. Same with AI. That's not what matters. Go and ask Russia, as you can see happening for them right now. Yes, they've had sanctioned to death. They're fine. And that's part of what you want to do. That's what makes you, anti-fragile in a sense. And we don't have that. And I think people really, have a sense of that. But that's not what, this 59% tariff or whatever on the islands or the tariffs on Vietnam, none of that made any strategic sense. So he really gave away a lot of that narrative. And in particular, you really see it with the approach to these China talks where arguably the area where we need the most autonomy from China on this rare earth minerals, refining, critical minerals, supply chains, is exactly where we seem to be giving up the most ground. And for what? Like, so soybeans are getting traded? Fine. You know, like I said, food is important, but that's not the headline about what we're all actually concerned about here. Vitamins, pharmaceuticals. And so, I don't know. I think it's almost like the classic Trump strategy of like causing something and then fixing it and declaring victory. Right. But, you know, this is not a game. This is very serious stuff. I talked yesterday about the drone attack by the Ukrainians on the Russian forces.
Yeah.
We are Russia. Like, with that people have not. We are Russia. We are the over-invested superpower with this massive infrastructure, empire across the world, with the ultra-exclusive guided missile destroyers and bombers and all that. The Houthis are able to withstand it. We're Russia in that situation. And I don't think people have really grappled with that. We don't have the drone. Do you know who has the drones? The Chinese. They have the best drone technology in the whole world. They've been planting drone swarms for a decade.
90% of drone production
of course.
in China. Yep.
This is what people are not grappling with, the asymmetry of a lot of warfare and even in an economy of where we are right now. And I'm really worried about it, because this is exactly where if you give away something like this and something pops off, you have no leverage anymore. You know, Trump famously, like, we have all the cards. He's like, yeah, maybe with Ukraine, but that's a tiny little nation. That's nothing compared to China about what we're talking about. This is serious stuff.
I mean, the rare earths thing alone was enough to bring the Trump administration to their knees.
Yeah.
And the Chinese reportedly like drove a really hard bargain on that. And like Saagar said before, we're like, you can have 6 months. You can have 6 months, and then we'll see. You know, I think broadly, part of what was so damaging to Trump about the Liberation Day tariffs was it really was kind of an emperor has no clothes moment.
Right.
He's always been very strong politically on the economy. I think that is the number one reason he got reelected, is because people felt like, you know, when I think back to the first Trump administration, I think I was doing a little better economically. And there's all this, you know, decades of mythology about Trump the great businessman and Trump the deal maker and all these sorts of things. And so this has been a real key to his political strength and power, is that people thought he was some sort of like economic genius. And when you looked at that chart, if you thought about it for 5 seconds, and were like, this makes no sense. This is going to be incredibly destructive. It's chaotic. There's no plan. They can't even tell us day to day what these things are meant to achieve. I think it was a real emperor has no clothes moment that hurt him in his key area of strength. Yes, immigration's been important to him from the beginning and other issues as well, but that has been the real promise and the core brand of Trump is he's the deal maker, he's the businessman, he'll make sure you're doing okay economically, and people were willing to overlook a lot on that promise. So when you see something so insane, so unjustifiable, where there's so few people who are willing to go out and just full-throated like, yes, this is a good idea, and here's where we're headed. I think that was, you know, a blow to him politically that will be very difficult to recover from, because once you start seeing him as sort of just like chaotic and wild and undisciplined and unplanned on the economy, you don't really unsee that after that happens.
Totally. And yeah, I mean, it's also exposed just a lot of things. Like now we have this bond problem, right?
Right.
With the U.S. debt. And I was arguing with several friends of mine because we were talking about the debt, and we're like, oh, there's going to be a debt crisis. And I was like, everybody in my entire lifetime and told me there's going to be a debt crisis was completely and totally wrong. So they're basically like Iraq, Saddam Hussein WMD people in my mind. If you study U.S. history, every debt crisis is because of what? Is because of a massive shift in geopolitical orientation and war. So we just talked about Iran. That's what would cause a debt crisis, just so everybody knows, is an actual massive impact to the Straits of Hormuz, supply chain, and all of the energy supply. JP Morgan forecasted this morning we could go to $120 per barrel. That's what causes a goddamn debt crisis. That's actually what we also see with the tariffs. The reason why, and as you remember, the bond markets are what forced Trump's hands. That was was not because of U.S. spending. It was because of a loss of faith in the U.S. as the primary guarantor and world's reserve currency. So by attacking that and the very foundations of the global American empire, which is both our force but is really our financial system, very much in the same way that the British financial system was the backstop of the whole sun never sets mercantilism thing, that is really the major effect that he has had. And so, look, deficits and all that, people know my feelings. I think it's all bullshit as long as the U.S. is at the top. But staying at the top is the reason. When you fall, then
suddenly you do have to worry about
let's all remember,
the debt and the deficit.
Look, the world reading the accounts of like John Maynard Keynes and of other British economists in 1919 are terrifying because I see us in those. They came out of this war and they won. Technically, but they really lost if you really, look at the overall destruction of their empire. And it's like they fall from the top of this empire and great European power to millions dead on the Somme and communism and socialism fears at home and having to pay all this debt from this war and all that. They never recovered from that. And we're the Brits in this scenario. And that's actually what worries me the most about it. And, the tariffs and all that, look, it's not going to cause it per se. But, these things, like empires don't just fall over a single thing. Nobody in 1919 woke up and said, the British Empire is over as we know it. It took until the 50s for it to fall apart. But in retrospect, it's obvious. And a lot of people saw it at the time, too. So that's what I worry about the most.
Shall we talk about our foremost
Elon.
oligarch?
Yeah, sure.
Speaking of crumbling empires. So Elon and Trump, you guys know the backstory. They're going at it. Elon, in particular, going very hard in the paint, accused Trump of being a pedo, said that he bought the election for him, said that he should be impeached, said accurately that the tariffs suck, and he projects that there will be a recession in the next half of the year. So, going about as hard as you possibly can in areas where Trump's ego is the largest and the most fragile. So now, at 3:04 a.m. yesterday, we get this tweet from Mr. Musk. He says, "I regret some of my posts about President Trump last week. They went too far." Now, I have to say, Candace Owens actually had a good tweet about this. She was like, so did they go too far because you were correct about him being in the Epstein files and now you feel bad about it? Or did they go too far because you were lying about him being in the Epstein files? Could you be a little more specific about what exactly is going on here? Because I don't know about you, but for me, if someone goes out and accuses me of being a pedo, that's going to be a hard thing to take back.
Yes.
Especially, listen, the Epstein thing it's a real problem for Trump. He was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. He was on that plane, we know in the flight logs, numerous times. There's pictures there's videos, et cetera. And now suddenly his administration is very weird and really dodging and lying and spinning, et cetera, when it comes to actually releasing the Epstein files. So in any case, he has apparently some sort of a relationship mending situation is unfolding where J.D. Vance and Susie Wiles approached Elon in particular, and we're like, all right, let's try to smooth the waters here, calm the waters here. And Elon did, now we have the reporting, also talk to Trump before putting this post out. So that's kind of where things stand at this point.
I really just have no idea. We have some comment here from the press secretary about the Elon rapprochement. Let's take a listen.
About Elon Musk, he issued an apology this morning. Has the president accepted the apology, or does he think it's too little too late?
The president acknowledged the statement that Elon put out this morning, and he is appreciative of it, and we are continuing to focus on the business of the American people.
We are appreciative of it. Some of the background of this is actually kind of interesting as well. So, this whole thing appears to have been brokered, like you said, by JD and by Susie Wiles. Trump receives this phone call. We have the reporting. We can put that on the screen. Late on Monday night, after days of Trump dodging Elon's calls. It comes after he speaks privately with Susie Wiles and with JD Vance about a path to the truce. Wiles told associates, quote, she had come to like working with Musk and was one of his regular points of contact. That is bullshit, by the way. Yeah, that's not what I heard.
Definitely
at
a lie.
All. But anyway, so what we kind of see inside of all of this is I'll say this. Why they want him back on side is interesting to me. Because he's obviously a huge political problem. The money yeah, it's good. But what? There's a dearth of rich billionaires
Right.
like wanting to give her, you know, come on. Let's not kid ourselves here. The heir of, what's the guy's name? Timothy Mellon?
Yeah.
The heir to the Carnegie Mellon fortune. He wired Trump like $55 million, you know, during the campaign. He actually would have been one of the biggest funders if it weren't for Elon. So I don't think money is the issue. I don't even really know what it is. We had this story about people who are worried about the Elon burn book, like the things that he might know.
You can
I
put
think
D4
that's
up on the
very
screen.
possible, right? So some of the possible inside details about what he knows about the administration. D4, please, guys. Can we put that on the screen? But I'm curious, why do they want him back on side? Like, he's not a political asset. I think we all know that.
No,
Yeah.
he is not a political asset, which is part of why I thought it was so weird. People like Rokana and others who were like, let's reach out to Elon. I'm like, how did this go? Like, putting aside the principles, which should be important, how did this go for Republicans? Has this been great for the Trump administration?
Right.
How did this go with that Wisconsin Supreme Court race?
Good point.
Was Elon a major asset there? Did that really help them, you know, be able to lose by double digits in that race? So, I mean, I can only speculate, right? So from the beginning, it was weird to me how, well, it was weird to me throughout the Trump administration how deferential he was to Elon. That was weird to begin with. Then when Elon goes nuclear, when Elon goes total scorched earth with you're a pedo and I won you the election and you should be impeached and JD Vance should replace you. When that happened, and Trump responded in this very meek way, like not at all characteristic of the way he usually goes, so hard, and he'll invent stories, and he knows he's got a gift for humiliation, right? He knows what he's doing in that department. He didn't do that. And in fact, JD Vance was on with Theo Vaughn while this was all unfolding. They were recording that interview. And according to the reports, at least, Trump counseled JD Vance to be diplomatic in that conversation. In fact, before I heard that report and I just listened to JD Vance on with Theo Vaughn talking about this, I thought, I don't know if Trump is going to feel like he went strong enough.
I thought the same thing.
For him. I don't know if he did enough here to like really project his loyalty. But apparently he was following the advice and the, you know, counsel of Trump in what he wanted him to do. So, I mean, I can only assume that either he is worried about like whatever Elon knows about the Epstein files, or perhaps he thinks Elon knows something about the election, whether that's true or not, that he doesn't want to come out, or there is some other, you know, unknown something or fear of some unknown something that Elon could reveal that would be genuinely damaging and a problem for him. Now, listen, there are things in the public sphere we know are cards that Elon holds. Trump has way more. He's the president of the United States. There's no doubt about that. Elon controls Twitter. Twitter's really important to the right now. That's very significant.
Yeah,
you know, that is like the backbone of Republican propaganda efforts is on Twitter right now. So that is important and consequential. Elon controls Starlink. Starlink is even more important and consequential as communications backbone, which I think is, you know, intentional on Elon's part to have that kind of control. It's worth remembering in the context of the Ukraine war. I mean, first of all, Elon saying, okay, you can use our, you know, Starlink satellites for your communications, extremely consequential for Ukraine. And then him as an individual being able to say, you know, I don't want you to use it for Crimea, so we're going to take that offline. Whether you think that's the right decision or not, having one person with that kind of control running his own foreign policy shows you how important Starlink truly is. SpaceX. NASA is very dependent on SpaceX at this point. You know, the International Space Station, very dependent on SpaceX at this point. This is a, I think, colossal indictment of the move that has, you know, occurred over successive administrations towards privatization, not only of NASA, but of all sorts of government, you know, formerly government-held capacity. And especially when you're talking about into the hands of one specific individual. So what was one of the first things that Elon said when Trump is like, I may pull your contracts. Elon's like, okay, fine, we'll decommission the particular spaceship that they use for the International Space Station. So these things are all known, but I still don't think that that is enough to really account for the very meek way that Trump has approached this and his willingness right away to sort of, you know, extend a hand and try to calm the waters here with Elon. So I have to assume, because one last thing here, to get to the burn book piece, it's not that these Republican aides are like, oh, I know he knows this about us, and so I'm concerned. They're like, he was in all of our departments. Like,
right, exactly.
Starlink was put in the White House to suck up all kinds of data. He's got his little minions, his little Doge minions who are loyal to him. About 100 of them is what I saw, spread throughout agencies throughout the government. So their fear is just like, we don't know what he knows or what sort of tea he could spill, or anyone will also just make some shit up too. That's not beyond him either. So it could also be one of those scenarios where Trump's just like, I don't know. He could know some things that would be really damaging, and that put some fear into
That's
him.
right. You don't even need a conspiracy theory. It's like somebody who's in the room. This happened so many times in the first Trump administration. Somebody who was in the room would come out of the room, and then they would denounce Trump, and they would tell us about all the things that was going on. That's how the Woodward books happened. That's how all this other stuff happened, right? And so here, I really think that might be one of the more animating ones.
But
the Twitter
in all
thing
of
is
those
also important.
instances, though, it's not like Trump was afraid to go after them.
Sure, yeah, but I mean, I think,
or looking to mend fences.
Well, Twitter, though, is actually the one that you mentioned, which is probably the most important, because Twitter is like the beating heart. See, you said Republican propaganda. I really don't think it's that. It's about elite conversation. Like, that is what Twitter ultimately is the place where narratives are set. Yes,
it's both.
Republican and Democratic, but like, it is the beating heart of politics as we know it. And I think that's because of that they see the power, and they're worried about, let's say, the algorithm of fundraising and so much more. And broadly, I mean, we shouldn't take this for granted either. I mean, they did buy a lot of their own BS. I mean, Elon was like deified into a god ever since he bought Twitter amongst a lot of Republicans. So, you don't necessarily want that person to turn against you. And so for a lot of them, maybe not necessarily the top of the White House, but let's say, Republican congressmen, officials, remember, there's like a Doge caucus, literally, in the House of Representatives. Like, there's all kinds of stuff that's happening inside of all of the party apparatus. I wouldn't be surprised either. The RNC, they're probably deeply integrated with Elon. So he does have leverage, of course, not nearly as much as Donald Trump.
The Epstein thing is real. I mean, this administration is acting so weird about the Epstein files.
I agree.
And Epstein said Trump and him were besties for a decade, right? You had Pam Bondi say that we've got thousands of hours of videos we're trying to go through, and that's why it's taken so long for anything to come out. Then you have Kash Patel go on with Joe Rogan to say there's no videos. These things are not.
No, that is nuts. I agree.
Like, they don't go together.
Yeah.
You had that crazy influencer boondoggle where they all came out with their photo op with their binders of information that was already widely publicly available since 2015, and actually Gawker had released more than was even in those binders. You had Kash Patel and Dan Bongino go on Fox and say, oh, no, we know that he killed himself. Like, we can tell you definitively. Like, just trust us. Don't you think we would tell you the truth? Just trust us. He definitely killed himself. There's nothing to see here. You had Kash Patel tell Joe Rogan that actually the cameras were on in the cell, which that is the opposite of what we've been told this whole entire time. Whenever Trump gets asked about Epstein, he gets really weird. We showed you the clip before. He gets asked, what about JFK? He gets asked about something else. He's like, yes, release the files. Yes, release the files. And then when it's Epstein, it's, well, I don't know, privacy, I'm concerned, maybe a little bit less on that one. Yeah. And that he always is like that with the Epstein thing. So, I mean, I do not put off the table whatsoever that also could be a core part of why he is so reluctant to burn the bridge and go completely scorched earth with Elon in a way that he has not been reluctant with literally anyone else who has crossed him.
It is weird. There's no question. The Epstein thing is absolutely crazy. As I still think it's the Israel connection. I really do, just especially considering the Israel firsters that are all in the administration. Because if I had to guess, the smoking gun stuff on the Mossad in Israel must be insane on Epstein. Like the control, the money, the control, what they were asking of him, for what exact purpose he all had. So I think that is still yet the most unexplored. And really the most under-discussed element of all of this. Everyone's like, oh, the compromise. I'm like, listen, I knew that was there. I'm like, I want to know at the highest levels of the government. Well,
that's what's
like how
consequential for foreign policy, for understanding the way that, this foreign government has operated within our own country. And yes, I was on with Piers Morgan this week, and we were talking about all of this stuff. And what the Republican, Roger Stone was on there. And
what did Roger say? I'm actually curious.
I mean, it's not a great format for him.
Yeah, right.
It was not a great. He needs a one-on-one.
He definitely does,
you know,
He's a
I
talker.
think older people too, like I struggle in that kind of panel format. So he honestly didn't have a lot to say. But basically, Piers and the two Republicans on the panel, Clay Travis and Roger Stone on the panel, were like, "Don't you think if there was something in the Epstein files about Trump that Democrats would have leaked it?" And I didn't have a chance to jump in, but my rejoinder would be like, number one, we know they're a Bill Clinton association, so they wouldn't want that piece out. And, you know, unlike you, I'm not a hack, so I'm willing to say, you know, this is a bipartisan situation here that could be very embarrassing. But number two, the Israel piece. Like, yeah, no American administration, which have been extraordinarily pro-Israel and hardcore Zionists, are going to want to reveal his connections to Mossad and that he was very likely, you know, based on what we know at this point, very likely an intelligence asset for them, and that's what he was up to. So, you know, to me, it's no mystery why this stuff stays under wraps, because it's both the whole intention, the whole project was creating material that was politically damning for both parties to exercise control. And then, you know, the reason for that is also politically damning and, you know, something that no American administration will want to come out. So
yeah, while I was on paternity leave, I somehow fell down this YouTube rabbit hole at 2 a.m. about spies. And so I started listening. I knew a little bit about the case. The Jonathan Pollard case is insane.
Really?
And it reminds me a lot of the whole Epstein thing. So Pollard is this guy working, I think it was at the NSA, and he's basically like a free-for-all, like he'll spy for anybody because he wants money. And he ends up hooking up with Mossad, and they pay him a lot of money to basically steal NSA or intelligence documents and smuggle them out, and he gets for it. Okay, well, eventually he gets caught and he gets sentenced to prison for, I don't know, 30-some odd years for espionage. In that time, Pollard basically transforms himself into saying that because he was a Zionist Jew, that he was spying for Israel because he believed they were not getting enough intelligence. Benjamin Netanyahu starts visiting Pollard in prison here in Washington. The entire Israeli government granted him citizenship. It became a point of diplomacy for that government to demand his release. Multiple Jewish billionaires in the United States petitioned President Clinton and other presidents since then till his release to be released from prison and be granted clemency because he had spied for an ally. And I was like, this is crazy. This guy is a straight up traitor. Netanyahu visits him in prison. The moment he's off parole, he flies to Israel and he lives there now currently. I was like,
was he greeted by Netanyahu like off the plane?
Yeah, I could not believe the level of influence of their government to have the audacity to basically beg every successive president, attorney general and others, to release him from prison. I mean, look, if a U.S. asset was caught spying for Mossad or for spying for us in Tel Aviv and they put him in jail, the Israelis would be outraged if we were like, hey, you got to release him. Like, you know, he's our guy, he's our citizen. You know, we're all friends here and all. Right. I couldn't believe that this was so all in the open. And what really reminded me of it is that people like me who are saying all these things I am right now in the 90s and the 2000s were branded what? Rabid anti-Semites for bringing all, and I was like, man, this machine.
And it worked for a long time.
It worked so well. And if I know this is bad, and the level of control and all that they have over our politics is just immense. It's horrific. You know, I could never even begin to like overstate what it is. But with the internet, you know, we have a chance to be able to speak out on some of this. And things are, as hard as it is to believe, things are still a lot better.
That is actually a good transition to Zohran.
Yeah.
Who they are trying to run he's an anti-Semite playbook against. And, you know, we've played some of the clips here that to me are just like mind-blowing. The clip from the debate where they're like, well, you know, lightning round, where would you go? First foreign trip as mayor, which, okay, why are you going on a foreign trip? But whatever. And Zoran's like, I'm going to stay in New York. And they're like, well, but would you go to Israel? Will you commit to going to Israel? In a later response, he actually said, I'm not sure they would let me in because I'm a supporter of the BDS movement, which is, again, so here's this guy who a decade ago, inconceivable that he would be in the running for New York City. Inconceivable that he would be in the running for New York City mayor. And this, you know, smearing him as an anti-Semite would have worked. Now, let's go ahead and put E3 up on the screen, and then I'm going to play you some clips from his appearance on The Breakfast Club. According to a new poll, This is the only one we have like this, so, cards on the table, all that stuff.
Everyone take it for a grain of salt.
According to a new poll from the Public Policy Polling Survey, up 4 points over Andrew Cuomo among likely Dem primary voters. This was conducted last week. So this is also, I think, the first poll that we have, which is post-debate and post-AOC endorsement. New York City does ranked choice voting. The poll's not ranked choice, so this would be basically like the first round, the result in the first round. It has never been the case. We've not seen any poll before that has him number one in the first round. And the dynamics of the race are such that, in all the polling we've seen that does simulate ranked choice vote, he picks up votes as you go throughout the round because other, more progressive candidates, basically their voters fall out, their second choice is Zohran or their third choice is Zohran or whatever. And there's a concerted, somewhat coordinated effort to not rank Cuomo on those ranked choice ballots whatsoever. In addition, this was really quite significant because the knock on him has been like, okay, he's doing good with like white progressives, but he hasn't been able to expand his base. He's supposed to be this democratic socialist running on freezing the rent and public grocery stores and free public buses and free childcare and all those sorts of things. This should be, he should want this working class base, and he hasn't been able to pull it together. Well, we now have some indications that he is growing in some of those key demographic areas. I could put this piece up on the screen, which was really significant. This E4, guys. His support continues to be strongest among white and Asian voters, but you now have 27% of black voters surveyed supported him. That's second only to Cuomo, who was somewhere around 40, as did nearly 1/3 of Hispanic voters, an indication he's gaining multiracial support among New Yorkers. And in fact, a previous poll that had come out before this that had him losing to Cuomo after all of the ranked choice voting only by 2 had found that the demographics where he was performing the most poorly were also the demographics that knew the least about him, which to me was an indication that potentially he had a lot of room to grow. He also, Saagar, had wildly higher favorability ratings than Andrew Cuomo, who of course, had to leave the governor's office in disgrace, both over sexual harassment and over his handling of COVID. He lied to Congress over, with this report that they put together that undercounted COVID deaths in nursing homes because he was trying to hide the deadly impact of some of his COVID-era policies. So he's got a lot of baggage, but he also has, Cuomo is the iconic name in New York politics. He has really coalesced as sort of like the establishment moderate figure in this race. And whether or not this poll is fully accurate, you can say at this point, Zohran is certainly giving him a run for his money.
Oh, I mean, this guy has, performed better than anybody I have seen yet, right? Like especially in terms of my expectations originally, I was like, I was like, look, no offense. I was like, I think this guy's going to lose by 50 points, just from a kind of a cynical assumption around how U.S. politics broadly or New York City politics kind of has been. They elected Bloomberg and de Blasio, for God's sake, right? Like this is not really a city that has rewarded upstarts, at least in the modern era. I will note, Bloomberg did endorse Andrew Cuomo, and there is like some centrist energy around the guy. But in a way, Zohran may have gotten very lucky in that the person that they picked is this at least not unpopular, but a scarred centrist figure of Cuomo who has the legacy of COVID, who has the fallout, the resigning, Me Too, that stuff did a lot of damage to his brand going into this. And so he's not untainted. And so you have the rise of like online resistance energy to Donald Trump. And then you have Cuomo, who's not only this establishment figure, but just like a deeply gross figure who has been so like tied with the New York machine. And you put those two things together and you kind of do have a perfect storm. It's possible. We don't want to overstate it. Like that said, that polls 500 people, okay? New York City is a population of millions. And also ranked choice screws everything up because yes, he may be the first choice in this poll, but the New York Times came out today and endorsed some guy I've literally never even heard of, right? And apparently the New York Times endorsement is quite impactful in the state or in the city of New York, or at least it was last time around. No, I mean, look, this sounds crazy, but right, we're talking about low turnout New York City liberal elections. Like the New York Times endorsement, if I recall, during the whole Andrew Yang situation, like it eventually did have some impact. And so I just have no idea how it is all going to play out. I do think he's going to do much better than we originally thought. At the very least, the guy has gained himself a profile of some kind, going into
Did they
the future.
endorse Brad Lander?
Yeah, that's who it is, Brad.
Okay.
Landers. Yeah, I'm like, who is that? Sorry,
He's well known.
I apologize.
He's well
I have
known
no
in
clue.
New York.
Yeah.
He's like pretty progressive, but not democratic socialist level of progressive. Well, I mean, here's the other thing that you have to hand it to Zohran. I don't care where you are on the political spectrum. He's run a fantastic campaign.
Oh yeah.
He has this very consistent, clear-cut messaging around we are going to make New York affordable. New York should be for everyone. And he's got some, really digestible, concrete policy proposals that he has relentlessly offered in order to marry the message with the policy. And it's clearly working. I mean, this guy, there are many other figures in this race who had a larger citywide profile than Zohran, even putting aside Cuomo. Brad Lander being one of them, Scott Stringer being another one, Adrian Adams being another one, who had citywide profiles and were established politicians and would have been, if you were putting money down, much more likely to sort of occupy the lane as the progressive anti-Cuomo choice. And he has blown them out of the water with the strength of his campaign, his social media game, and he's very good. And I think you'll see that now in some of these clips that we can play you from The Breakfast Club. So he went on, I think it was yesterday, and he gets asked, about Trump, and he gets asked about Democratic Party leadership and, how we need to move past that era. And Charlamagne seems to be pretty sympathetic to him. Let's go ahead and take a listen to this first part from Zohran about standing up to Trump.
But I saw you say that in the debate, you would be Trump's worst nightmare. But once again, why should that matter to anybody voting for you now? Because you're not running against Donald Trump.
No, but you are running against the authoritarianism that he's bringing to this city.
So you think Cuomo's an authoritarian?
No, I think that there's too many commonalities between him and Donald Trump's record. And my point is that you don't want to have a mayor who has to pick up a phone call from someone who cut a $250,000 check to both him and Donald Trump. You want to have a mayor who's willing to fight for the city and have that be the thing that he's ultimately responsible for. And I think to your point, we also have to be honest about how we lost this presidential election. New York is the state that had the largest swing in the country towards Donald Trump, 11.5 points. And it happened far from the caricature of Trump voters. It happened in the hearts of immigrant New York City. I went to Fordham Road in the Bronx. I went to Hillside Avenue in Queens. And when I asked New Yorkers there, almost all of whom were Democrats, who did you vote for and why? Many told me they didn't vote. Many told me they voted for Trump. And they told me they voted for him because they remembered having more money in their pocket 4 years ago for their rent, for their childcare, for their groceries, even for their Metro card.
They remember how they feel. Yeah.
And as insincere and ridiculous and horrific as we know Trump's policies to be, that is how people felt. Those are the decisions that they made. And when I asked these same New Yorkers, what would it take to bring you back to the Democratic Party? They said a relentless focus on an economic agenda.
So, Saagar, you see there how he turns this question, a challenging question to him about Trump, like, why are you focused on Trump, into, number one, you should care that Cuomo's getting money from the same guys. And he used these same sort of lines in the debate, I think, to great effect of like, he's getting money from the same billionaires as Trump, and that's something you should be concerned about. And then he is immediately able to turn it to his message about affordability and how he's going to appeal to voters. And he goes right after that part, he goes through as like, free childcare and free bus fare and freezing the rent. He goes through his list of policy priorities. So, I mean, he's skilled.
He's a good communicator. He was the podcast guy. He was the online guy. He really learned a lot from a lot of the movement. From a lot of the Bernie Sanders wing. And look, I've got a lot of differences with Mr. Zohran, but I will say I respect people who are underdogs, people who are able to use the internet and to use the new lessons of politics to be able to overcome things. And regardless of whether he wins or not, he is going to be a fixture of some kind in New York City politics. He could find himself running for Congress, or for any other. Like, this is this is one of those campaigns where whether you win or lose, like, you won something, and you won something big. Especially, I don't even know if he wants to necessarily remain just the city of New York. Like, he could easily find himself vaulted to, the member of Congress, or who knows? I mean, what AOC wants to do, right? If she decides to primary Chuck Schumer, or if Chuck Schumer decides not to run, there's a lot of different things that are on the table.
Indeed. He also got asked about, Dem leadership and failures of Dem leadership in the context of challenging Andrew Cuomo. I thought he responded to this well, too. Let's take a listen to that.
You do have to throw that old regime under the bus. Because it's not just Cuomo.
But that bus is going to be free.
Oh, sure. but it's not just Cuomo in the Democratic Party. It's a lot of old leadership.
Absolutely.
It's the Chuck Schumers. It's the Bidens. You got to throw all of that under the bus and run it over. And people have to hear you say that because I keep hearing y'all, you keep talking about Trump.
No, but
your party has been just as ineffective and just as corrupt in a lot of ways.
Trust me, I hear you because I've been critical about the style of leadership that gave rise to Donald Trump. Is also a style of leadership within the Democratic Party. And I think for too long, it's been a party that has valued insider politics, pay your dues, the words and advice of consultants over the people that are Democrats themselves. And I do think it's time for a new generation of leadership. Cuomo would be the oldest mayor elected in New York City. I would represent a completely new generation. And I think it's important for that because it's not just about age. It's not just about vision. It's also about what has your record been and who have you been fighting for? And is that distinct enough from what got us here?
It's such a strength to be able to unequivocally bash Democratic leadership because they are so unpopular with the entire country, also at this point with the Democratic base. And so that he feels no qualms about being like, yeah, there are a lot of problems there. They're corrupt. They caused a lot of issues. That's going to be appealing outside of just a hardcore progressive base.
So part of that Quinnipiac poll, which was making waves yesterday, again, whether you believe it or not, is actually the most unpopular thing in that poll was the Democratic Party. Is the Democratic Party approval rating has just 21%. Disapprove is 70%. So running against it, you're an idiot.
It's a no-brainer.
I've been aghast at the Democrats, honestly. We talked about the DNC, but I never thought I'd be in a position to defend David Hogg. They destroyed this man for nothing. He said, I'm going to primary people who are not standing up for our values. And then they removed him using some DEI gender component. It's like a cartoon.
It's such a character.
What did he do wrong?
I know.
This guy played ball every step of the way. He defended Biden. He's not some Bernie Sanders shit lib. And all he said was, hey, I think we need some new blood. And they cut his head off. Yeah. They killed him.
Yeah.
Politically. I mean, I can't believe it. I can't believe they would do that to him. I really do think if you're a young Democrat out there, you need to stand up for David Hogg. It's not right what they did to him. They nuked him. Even James Carville said that he agreed with him. Yeah. And they still took him out. I'm aghast, honestly,
you should
at the level of control that these people have.
They are so useless.
It's unbelievable.
It's truly unbelievable. So for Zohran to be like, throw him under the bus.
Right,
the bus will be free. I mean, he's, that's that is a strength. And I think one of the things that we've been looking at too is the demographics where he's strongest. Yes. And if you're looking for someone who appeals to the bros, Zohran is really cleaning up in that department.
Yeah, good point.
And I think part of it is because of this orientation, because he's anti-system. And I think, part of what's going on here is that is actually more important than where he is on the ideological spectrum. People feel like, oh, he's different. He's willing to criticize his own party. Cuomo, let's put E5 up on the screen. It was the last piece here. Cuomo's main argument against him is that he's not experienced enough, that he doesn't have enough governance experience, which, at the mayor level, this is someone who actually has to do a real job. Things need to happen for the city's residents. The trash needs to be picked up. The snow needs to be removed. There's contentious local governance issues. And so he's trying to make the most of that he can. And Zohran is only 33 years old. So that Cuomo is, in effect, running a very sort of standard issue establishment playbook. I'm the one who has the experience. You can trust me. You may not love me. That's okay. But I'm the one that you know and can trust, and I can, handle the city, and I know what to do. And oh, by the way, that guy's an anti-Semite. That's basically his playbook. And look, it may be enough. It might be. But I think you have to, if you just look at the trajectory of the polls right now, Zohran has all of the momentum. He sucked up all of the oxygen in the room. The AOC endorsement, I do think, is actually going to be significant because Zohran has lagged in terms of appeal to women. I think she could help in that department. She also just gives him some legitimacy, given that he does have, a small amount of experience and is relatively young, having this AOC, who's now a titan of New York City politics, have her give her blessing, I think, is significant as well. I think it's pretty likely Bernie is going to come in for him too.
At the last minute. It's a little bit last minute, though. I mean, it's on Saturday, so Or sorry, next Tuesday.
Yeah, it
And
is.
there's
but
not a lot of time.
He responded like, stay tuned or so. So I think that he probably is going to come in as well. And I do think they start voting like this weekend. So it is
New York is all between
last
ranked
minute.
choice, early vote, and then taking like 9 months to count their ballots.
We'll find out the election results this year, next year this time, something like that.
Completely insane system.
In any case,
Yeah.
very interesting race. And I think part of the reason to cover it, New York City obviously is consequential in and of itself, but also for taking the temperature of where the Democratic base is, I think is also significant here. Very different than the dynamics that unfolded when Eric Adams was elected.
Very true. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. We really appreciate it. Don't forget, we've got the free month trial going on right now. BP free is the very last day. You can take advantage. BreakingPoints.com. Go ahead and sign up, and we will see you all later.